Welcome to the Coast Podcast. I'm Emilie, a virtual assistant agency owner who left Amazon in 2019 to build my dream.
And I'm Whitney, a freelance writer and communications consultant who never felt at home in a cube farm.
We didn't see many people paving their own ways like we decided to, so we created this podcast to talk to others who were brave enough to pick a different path. Creatives, entrepreneurs, people doing their careers and their lives their way.
Join us as we learn from them, get inspired, and show you beautiful paths less traveled.
Not every road leads to the coast, but the ones that do come with a great view.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Coast. Today I am running solo and I'm gonna vibe with our guest, Jessica Valentine, who works in change management. She'll get into this for us because it's like one of those jobs like my husband's where I'm like, I want to explain it well, but I'll listen to it a million times and still not know how to explain it. So that's why she's here to explain it. And then also has a company called Wise Woman Co., which is all about empowering women and helping them reach their next level in their jobs, their lives, their careers, etc. And she's also a million-hour certified yoga instructor and a speaker at all these corporate events. So the coolest thing about Jessica and why I wanted to have her on our podcast is so that she could talk about how she blends all of these worlds together, because she is in this like super, super corporate world and then also integrates so much mindfulness into everything that she's doing there in her life and in her corporate life, which I think is beneficial for everybody and something that I never really felt like I could do both. I could never be woo and be in these big corporate juggernauts. So as a reminder for everyone here, I'm Whitney Popa. I run a communications consultancy in Edmonds, Washington. Emilie is my co-host, and she runs a virtual assistant agency in Linwood, Washington. And we are here to talk to people like Jessica, who are entrepreneurs, go-getters, creatives, and doers out in the world. So we really appreciate your time, Jessica, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. What an introduction. I'll call you my big girl anytime.
I would love to be that. And what I forgot to mention too is usually we're talking to a lot of local people because we're just out in the community always with local people, but you live in Austin, Texas.
Correct. I live in Austin. Yeah. I grew up outside of Houston. I interned and started my career in New York and spent a lot of time on the West Coast in San Francisco and love being there when I can.
Yeah, you're a woman of the world. And Wise Woman Co. It just feels like a world dominance sort of thing.
What's interesting is our community is actually all over the US and Canada as well. It's compiled of women that I've met in my life journey. I used to be a leadership consultant for a sorority. So I traveled the country for 2 years after college and I met so many friends and it's been beautiful. I think this is really the impetus of Wise Woman Co., but it's been beautiful to see them step into their own wisdom, like since just seeing them in college over a decade ago to now, right, having babies, building families, having businesses, and making an impact in the world. So I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, and as a fellow sorority girl, I know how hard that is to become one of those. They pick like 7 every year.
Right. Yeah, and it was such a fun job. And I think I'll start with this. My love of people and change started in that role. So at the time, I'll actually take it back. I went to a very small university that my parents ended up meeting at in East Texas called Stephen F. Austin. And our sorority chapter size was about 100. We had a house of 40 people. And my sophomore year, the organization was really struggling. And I got appointed as a sophomore president of my sorority by national officers, and then had to have like a turnaround, which is what they call it right in business. It's like a turnaround group, a realignment of, hey, you're underperforming. you have financial issues, risk issues, you are an absolute hot mess. And then I remember
Mhm.
our national leadership saying, Jessica, do you think you can fix it? And I just believed in the vision. And so I think my love for organizational change started there. And at 19, gained so many life skills that made it easier for me to navigate people, companies, programs, especially within the cybersecurity industry. So,
Yeah, no, that's major. And yeah, I want to like underscore that though, because like I always say that my sorority experience was like one of the biggest things that contributed to my career and what I do now. Even like when people compliment me on how I can remember names, that's all from the sorority, and how to even communicate with people generally, how to hold a conversation, all
right.
from recruitment. I think we talked about this before too. Like I was head of recruitment for Panhellenic at my school. And that was like this huge thing for me. I prepared all summer for it to be in front of all these women.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just the responsibility that you have and feel for all these people, and you do have a lot of responsibility at such a young age. It really does kind of show you, oh, I'm good at this, or this lights me up and I'm going to follow more of this throughout my career. So you're at college. What did you major in?
I majored in communications because I hated computer science. And then I have
Mhm.
a 10-year plus career in the technology industry. I used to work in sales for like an Israeli cybersecurity firm. I had no idea what I was doing. I had just come off of traveling for the sorority, and I was in a female, like a very female forward organization, and then stepping into the world in cybersecurity. At the time, there was only 11% women. And I remember, and this is really why I started Wise Woman Co. I remember early in my career not being supported by other women. I couldn't find mentors because they weren't being paid to do so. They saw me as competition. And it was really through my initial yoga certification that I was essentially leadership development that I started hosting quarterly and moderating panel sessions for women in cybersecurity. And so that is, and I also didn't feel like I belonged to my current day job. So that's how I built my brand as an individual and was able to move my career forward and step outside of sales into organizations that would move me up to be a strategist at Dell Technologies and create an internship program, all because I built that external network. I did what was unique to me, but most importantly, and especially, I found wise women along the way, women in business who didn't want to go to women in tech happy hours or just like male bashing sessions, like they were too busy, like doing really badass things. And I wanted to be one of them. And I wanted to create a community of people who also wanted to open up doors for others. So I think that that's been the most interesting piece of my journey. Is just I'm so grateful for the women who have been both spiritually based and successful, who play such a big role behind the scenes in my career. Because I think that's true for life too. Like no one sees the moves that you're making behind the scenes, especially as a business owner. There's things that are gritty, there's things that some are glamorous, but at the end of the day, whenever you're navigating change or dealing with chaos or a serious life event, I needed someone to be there for me. So that inspired the coaching practice, the retreats, and I'm excited to see where it'll go.
Yeah. Something that we have in common too is like you created what you didn't see. So you were like, oh, I didn't have this. And that's like we met in the Abundant Collective that
Mm-hmm.
Jenny Addition put together. And she's kind of a nomad now, but she is and was based in Austin too. But I had met her years and years ago through my job at Nordstrom. And she's always a good reminder of these manifestation techniques of like, you embody it first. Like, oh, I remember even with that, I called in like, where's my tribe of women? And at the
Mm,
same time, right after I joined the Abundant Collective, then a local group started inviting me to things, just kind of a random DM on Instagram.
love that.
And what I'm hearing from you that I feel like we both probably do subconsciously now is like, oh, I don't have this thing and I'm not like mad about it. I'm just going to like work to create it and call it in. Like if you want love, be love sort of thing.
I think it's so important.
Yeah. And like to your point about like working with women, I work in more, I've always worked in kind of like the marketing things where there's a reputation of women being really catty. And unfortunately, I've found through my career that like most of, not most, a lot of the female bosses that I have had have not been supportive of other women. I've had more success with male bosses than I've had with female bosses, which is unfortunate. But when it's like lateral, and most of the people, like my coworkers and everything, we've been huge champions of each other. But in most like top down hierarchical situations, if I'm on their team directly, it hasn't necessarily been positive. So I'm interested in how you met these women and like called them in, because if you didn't have them at first, you had to create something, and then maybe because you saw it, they came, and like
Yeah.
you build it and they'll come. Or like, how did that evolve for you, where you're like, oh, I'm kind of bummed out I don't have these women, and then I'll create this thing, and then you also found mentors along the way?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with this. The impetus of Wise Woman Co. is, and I've said impetus twice. Sorry, I'm still in the office. Loving my vocab. Please delete that out or keep it. It's very I would say that to me, Wise Woman is more about your inner wisdom, and it's regardless of gender. So if you identify as female, male, non-binary, this is really about tapping into the divine feminine energy within you. And I learned all of that in yoga. And also having sort of yoga studios, watching them crumble pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, because they lacked inclusion and diversity. Except there's so much on that. But I think to your question of how did I find these people along the way? How did I create that? I would say naturally, being one of the youngest grandchildren in a large Italian Brady Bunch Texan family, I was very social. And I learned in order to survive and really thrive in the workplace, I needed to lean into my gifts, which were and are public speaking and building connections with people, true, genuine connections. I used to joke to my family and friends when, especially early in sales, because I never really I identified with the title of being in sales, or I thought it was like all of the stereotypical things. I was really good at it because I solved really complex problems and listened to people. But I would joke that one reason I was successful at sales was because I didn't like traditional sales. And I think that as people who are looking for something, whether that's in your career specifically, mentorship, personal growth, professional growth, finding people, you can do that in a way that's free or funded, is what I want to say. I think investing in coaching is an excellent idea. It goes back to this principle called the 70-20-10 model, which is like from learning and development, that in order to learn a new job, and maybe even if you're creating your own job, one of the best ways you'll learn is spending 70% of your own time like actually going to do the thing. And then you need to spend 20% of that time getting mentoring, getting coaching. So if you have the funds to invest in that, awesome. And then you'll spend the rest, that 10%, on like formalized courses, like taking a training, etc. So to me, it was learning along the way subjects that I was passionate about and connecting the dots of, hey, I'm really unhappy in my career, and simultaneously growing as a yoga teacher, that I realized that I needed mindfulness most in the Monday through Friday. I was good on the weekends. I was good on the weeknights and week mornings. But how could I apply techniques to when things hit the fan in the middle of my workday in order to create a sense of calm and chaos? And so I think that that's important, to connect to your own sense of purpose in order to be more present. And I know I said a lot there, right? I highlighted the 70-20-10, a great way to split your time or think about your own development. There's, right, the piece on connecting with people who can support you. I also think a big challenge, even though you didn't ask this question, I'll share it, is like a big challenge is a lot of women aren't trained to ask for help or support. And when we do, we think it's a weakness. And even like when we try over and over again, when we really, really need it, we sometimes and likely will not ask. We'll just bootstrap it, do it ourselves, and then we become burned out or overextended.
Yeah, I've actually been getting better at that in my business where I'm like, oh, I can ask for help, or I feel better if I like hire help. But because I've built these communities in the past couple of years, I feel more comfortable leaning on other people in a way that I don't feel like I'm asking them to do something that they don't want to do. And it's really cool to hear from you too that like you became a safe place for people, and so then they helped you build more safe places for other people.
Oh, so true. And even here's what I would say. I started with Accenture, which is a company that has 700,000 employees worldwide, $50 billion, like does really amazing things in the world. So I was interviewing a lot, really the last 4 months of last year. People don't see that behind the scenes. So I wanted to share that. And one of the questions someone asked me during my interview was, what's something that you're the most proud of? Like in life and in work. And one of my responses to that, I would say two things. One is I call my grandparents who are alive nearly every day, very close with them. That's a priority. But the second piece is that most people, when I see them at conferences, when I see them at networking events, people who I've known in my career a long time or even a little time, the first things, they always pull me to the side. We're always talking about mental health, talking about therapy, and talking about the real nitty-gritty things going on in their work and in their world. And to me, that is an honor to be able to witness and hold space, as cliche as that saying can be sometimes, for someone to just empty out and to say what's on their heart and mind. And so I do my own work to energetically, clear those things or give people resources where I can. But I would say if that's something that I'm most proud of, it would be is how there's sort of like an underground, in tech it's called a dark net, which is so nerdy, right? There's sort of like an underground community of like people who want to keep it real. And I think that realism is refreshing. I think more women want the truth. I think especially in marketing, like less fluff. Yes, make your communications catchy, right? But I think even the term building community, most people build a community, but there's something that they want from you, or they're on a pedestal. And so I think that it's an important in yoga philosophy to share, and this is really Buddhism, is that you are your own teacher. And so I think the world could change if there was more coaches and teachers and influence in the world who would actually teach someone to be their own teacher and have more autonomy, have more sense of an empowerment, and especially a sense of responsibility of this is your life, this is your career. You get to choose if you want to live in the light, what I call the sun, or live in the shadows and be in the dark. There's resources to help you if you don't want to stay there.
And it's also a bummer for me to hear like that it's still a dark net. Like I want it to be a light net. I want everybody to be like walking around being like, what's your therapist telling you this week?
Yeah, I think it's trust and intimacy. And here's something that I've learned. So I am almost like literally within 2 weeks, I will be a certified life and career coach. And I used to eye roll at like certifications, or I didn't need that. But it wasn't until a mentor in the corporate world said, Jessica, if you want this to be on your resume and you want your companies that you work for to take you seriously, here's a framework that you need. And now I get why. And here's what I want to say. Yes, we can learn about what our therapist, I think that's very millennial and Gen Z of like things we say to our therapist, things they say back, that self-inquiry is excellent. But I don't think that enough people are actually separating or making the distinction between coaching and counseling. Like it's a big issue, and it also comes up in the personal development world and in the yoga world. So I'm a big fan of like, I wouldn't talk about my nutrition with a yoga teacher or someone who isn't a nutritionist. Like, yes, they may have advice and like great practices, but that may not work best for me. So I think that's honoring to their wisdom and ability to self-invest, especially if they're asking for an investment from you.
Right. So when you say the difference between coaching and counseling through this program that you're taking, what is the difference?
So there's three differences between coaching, counseling, and consulting. What counseling is typically is like from the past. It's getting to the why. It's understanding what's underneath the root cause. Spirituality dips lots of toes into things that could be counseling when sure it is their business, but there's not, I believe firmly in like having a therapist in a yoga teacher training, because it's much more than just learning and whatnot. Like to me, that's important. And then also, so that's counseling, past driven. What's the why? Let's talk about your childhood, family relationships, all the things. What consulting is consulting is giving advice based on your own experience. So based on your wisdom, based on your area of expertise, you're sharing and you're telling someone what to do. You're giving them advice. Coaching is different. It's from present moment to future, very forward focused. You're not focusing on the why, which is a challenge, and you're helping people get to where they want to go by asking them powerful questions to create their own answers. And only with permission can you ask to give advice if they want it. And I feel like that's been such a dance in my business because I've had a coaching practice for 2 years without a coaching certification. And the reason why I took that was because I had some very heavy things get brought to me in a group setting or even in a private setting that I felt like I could have been more prepared for because it was along the lines of counseling, but did what I needed to do to get people the support that they needed then. And I think that shows two things. One, it shows like the beauty of the experience of when women come together and speak truth to what's on their hearts and minds. And then I think the other thing is also just honoring the resources and the support that we do have available to us, whether you work for yourself and have your own benefits or you work for a company and have those benefits, to lean into those.
I learned something recently about coaching too, of like doing all of your own work about like your trauma attachments and all of that, so that you're not bringing that into wanting to be a coach, of wanting to fix people or do any of that work. It's really about, like you said, letting them make their decisions and empowering them to do what they need to do, instead of like, and part of that too is doing your internal work of like, my hands are moving around my heart. That's where I always feel my anxiety of like, if somebody brings something to me, I used to be a fixer where I'm like, okay, let me go through all these things of like how I can help them, when really that's not the point, and that's my stuff to work through. And I can't be a good whatever I want to be, even for my clients. Like there's so many different counseling, coaching things that I run into, feeling like, okay, what's mine, what's theirs, and where can and should I support them in this? And that's been something that through doing my own work and like really digging into my woo and my spirituality, I've come to this place where I'm so much more grounded in a little bit of my like, I don't give a fucks that in a positive way of like, it's like a positive frame of that, of like, this isn't mine to take on. And like, even just the hand movements that I'm doing of like creating the wall, you know, having symbols on myself of like, if I wanted to wear an obsidian necklace or something, that's some advice that I've gotten recently too, of like, okay, what can I take on and how do I not feel that in my body as much anymore when somebody's bringing something to me?
Totally.
And they have to feel, just like you've been talking about, that comfort, that level of vulnerability. Like it's great that they think that you're a dumping ground, but then your job is, how do I not take that on or not? What do I do with this? There's so much that you're having to work through. And if you haven't done your work around it or taken those certifications, then it's a lot harder often. I mean, certain people are primed better than others, but
100%.
it's so cool to hear that. Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer that healing happens in co-creation.
Mm-hmm.
Getting a massage, speaking to a therapist, speaking to a coach, speaking to a friend, because it has to get out of you and like in this shared space. And then whatever spirituality that you believe in, right? I really align with the word Holy Spirit, but that literally being like the entity that between you two and the divine, that clears out space for something.
Yeah. And I find that yoga is deeply spiritual, and for a lot of people too. Like, how long have you been a yoga teacher?
Yep. So I've been practicing for 10 years and teaching for 7. 2 of those were in the pandemic. So I quit teaching in studio yoga then. And that's when I started my business. And it was most interesting. I rejoined a studio and I started teaching again about a month ago. And I've been teaching 4 to 5 classes a week on top of working full time and having a business.
It's a lot.
That's a lot. I was very excited just to be back. And it was very emotional for me too, because teaching yoga helps you look at where in your life that you are and are not living the practice. And mostly you're teaching to themes that you're working through that are your own medicine. So I've also have taught prenatal yoga, which is different.
I saw that.
So fun. I would just have to share something beautiful. Like last night, we had a pretty large group of women and they all faced each other during class. I didn't plan that. That's just like how they were. Some of them hadn't moved like in the first half of their pregnancy. And so just getting them reconnected with their bodies and breath. And I just feel so honored to be like in a space to guide. And I had done certification. So I have a 500-hour certification in teaching yoga. I did sort of a power yoga 200-hour training, which is like a bachelor's degree. Then I did a 300-hour through Wanderlust with Leah Cullis and Kate Wadeskin. And I've been on 3-week-long retreats. But it's so interesting how my yoga practice has shifted over my life. I mean, moving on the spectrum of, okay, I'm using yoga for weight loss and running marathons and looking hot because I'm dating, to experiencing an injury, needing yoga for anxiety or panic attacks, right? And wanting to teach yoga in the corporate world. So it's I think it's been really fun to come back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And to put all of that together. So like even now when we worked together earlier this year, mm-hmm. It was to help you bring all of that together and do more speaking engagements about how you combine all of these things. And have you found that you've been supported along the way, or you're just like, I don't care if you support me, I'm doing these things and they matter?
Right. Well, I'll say this. So early, I was in my career for about 4 years before I became a yoga teacher. And it found me at the right time. And at the same time, when I got my second training, that was another pivotal moment because I was sort of peak of my career working with some Fortune 50 technology executives, but so miserable and like crying on my living room floor on the phone with employee like assistance program because we were going through a reorg. The boss who hired me left. My current boss and executive was a toxic female. And I knew like I could smell the writing on the wall 9 months before it happened. And at the same time, I was going through teacher training. And so that I knew I wanted a sabbatical then. I manifested that when I got laid off 9 months later. And that gave me the experience to decide what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it. And it also taught me that I wasn't, my worth wasn't wrapped up in my job title. And that job titles truly don't matter. Like people make up their own. And even like, for example, my title at Accenture sounds very fancy. It is complex and like very intellectually stimulating, but people, I think I need to answer your question because I haven't done that yet. But what I want to share is that I think based on my birth chart reading, I guess I have something in Gemini. So I'm meant to have dual careers. And I feel like it's part of my own healing, having been laid off before, I met Elena Brower and she mentioned how she has like 6 streams of income and was all about like building its revenue streams. And I was like, blow my mind, sister. Tell me more. And I want to say this too. It's like I never thought of teaching yoga as a side hustle for the 5+ years I was teaching in studio in Houston and in Austin. Like it didn't hit me until I lost a job and needed that income, or I did a program and I was making, I made $1,000 for 15 hours of work. I was like, that was fun. It didn't feel like it. So I want to say this. I think everyone has a calling. I am very clear on what my calling is. There's a book that I read called The Crossroads Between Should and Must by Elle Luna. It's also like watercolor, like visually friendly, which I love. But it talks about how everyone has a job, a career, and a calling. And you just have to decide like which one that you're in. So early in my career, I knew that. And so I think a part of Wise Woman Co's purpose and healing like how women work, because I don't think we're meant to work traditionally or right sort of this always on, just based on our cycles of our bodies, cycle of the seasons, cycle of life if you have children or don't have children or dating, etc. I just think we've missed out on honoring, right? I want to record a podcast during my lunch break, or I'm teaching yoga in the morning, so I'm signing on at 9. Like there, and I think with the pandemic, it's helped. So many of us look at, well, what do I actually want to do? What makes me happy? And what's going to help me hold it together when I feel like the world's falling apart? To me, it's that sacred window in which I want to serve. And the last thing that I'll say about this point, it's been so beautiful. I've worked individually with about 250 women, but like in private coaching, about 30. But to see women make such big shifts in such short time, that's what lights me up the most. And not taking on, like, it is shared success. It's not my success as a coach. They did the work, but they also had the courage to ask for help when they needed and to get really clear on what they wanted. And then they went out and did the actions that aligned to that and created their own life leading from their inner wisdom.
Which is hard work. It's easy to say like, oh, they went out and did it, but like actually doing it is so hard. I can make a decision even like with moving my clients around in different ways and being like, I need to see if they'll scale up here or scale down over here. And it's taken me a long time to even build up like, okay, can I ask for this to protect my own energy, space, whatever? And can I give myself permission to ask? And kind of to your point, I've always had the first like 2 years of me getting like really deeply into like, how do I define my spirituality? What is this for me? I kept getting all this feedback from healers all the time saying like, you need to have better boundaries. And I was like, shit, like, what is this? Because I'm really good at articulating my boundaries, but I wouldn't hold them. And I wouldn't hold them with myself. That was the biggest part where I would say, hey, this isn't okay for me. And then they would be like, no, we disagree. And then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. And the conflict of like being like, I'm a badass woman and I'm going to get what I want. And then I would like allow myself to be steamrolled and not even realize it. That's where the work was for me. I mean, there was so much work in so many ways, but that's one of the places.
Well, and that's the underlying like wounded feminine too, is the people pleasing, like the secret people pleasing that aligns to the I'll do whatever you need me to do, that breaks or holds my boundaries. That's really interesting because I think that boundaries are important. I think that there's different levels of boundaries, but I also think that there needs to be a shift in people saying, I don't have time for that, or I can't afford that, into that's not a priority for me.
Yep. I love that. I always say that.
Right now. It's so freaking good. It's like, no, actually, it's not the most important to me right now. And one of the switches that I've made recently is to only coach people on Friday afternoons, where I have the most flexibility in my work schedule. And it came up this week. I noticed I was sort of bleeding boundaries. I'm like, oh, make Wednesday night happen or Thursday night, even with friends. And I'm like, can you do Friday afternoon? Because that's all I have right now. And I think that that's so important in different seasons of life, seasons of expansion, or even seasons of solitude. You may not want to energetically share your energy, time, talents with other people. Can I share a practice that I love? Because I love teaching people tools. I love in the morning putting my hand over my belly and heart and classifying my energy, being like, okay, red, yellow, green light. How's my energy feeling today? Emotionally drained. That's a red. I need to just do the bare minimum and take care of me. Yellow. I'm good. I'm going to pace myself. Green. Put me on 5 podcasts. I'm feeling fiery. Let's just release it. And I think it's important to balance, that self-awareness of what can I give today, no matter what you had planned, and move it forward.
That's such a simple way to think about it too. It makes it accessible, because I feel like a lot of people get stuck in like, oh, let me have a morning ritual, or let me read all these books to like, up level my life, but I can't handle it. Like it's too much for me. And then I feel bad about it. I should be meditating. I should be doing more yoga. And people get all bogged down in these things when it really can be so simple, or start simply. And even for me, like just having lemon water in the morning as part of my routine, and a little like few minutes of mindfulness, adding something like that is really simple. And you can check in throughout the day too with something like that.
Yeah, because if you have, a challenging conversation with your partner or your boss and you need to regroup, you need to be able to pivot. And I'm all about like, let's have a plan, but also let's pivot of what you need to do to take care of your energy now. I think that something that got on my nerves as, this yogi in the corporate world was when we would bring in mindfulness professionals, neuroscientists, yoga teachers, and they were amazing at what they did, but they also missed out on like true learning principles and adults can only hold 5 to 7 things in their mind at one time. 5 to 7. So if someone's already balancing 5 things, give them 1 or 2. That is so much more powerful. Like actually teaching people something is so powerful, but I think there's also a romanticism with how we approach our days and how we approach our week, especially if you're in spirituality or entrepreneur. Like I should do and be all these things. Maybe you just need to cry. Maybe you need to grieve. Maybe the morning routine should be tossed out the window and you can just be present with what is as you are and let go of the plan. I think it's fun to just mix it up seasonally. And really lean into your intuition when you can. Because I do think there's a false sense of reality and a romanticism about rituals and routines. Like people are actually just making them to record a great Instagram reel. Tell me what you're like on a Tuesday morning when I don't see the performative spirituality going on. So
yeah, no, that's why I could never do reels in that way.
Yeah, it's not my style either. I do want to share, you asked earlier about like if people were supportive of me sort of living this middle message and middle life. I think this is for any, the listener who has multiple passions or identifies as a multi-hyphenate, or maybe is, doesn't know where they want to go next or in this season. It's like you have to be okay with loving the things that you love simply because you love them. All throughout my life, especially my career, early in tech, my family was like, why are you teaching yoga? Where do you that's not, you need to focus on your job. Well, that's their mentality. That's not mine. And I also think, I'm just someone who has practiced having a greater capacity emotionally or things on my plate for a long time. And I don't look at other people and say, you should have this kind of capacity too. You should have 3 businesses. Because I also know that for me does have an expiration date. It is seasonal until, I bring on this thing called motherhood, or I decide to fold in, what I'm doing or collapse what I'm doing. Like, I don't think I'll always be able to teach yoga 5 times a week. That probably needs to shift down to like the minimum right now. But I think it's all about doing what you love and designing a life you love. A really practical way to do that. Can I give this tip, Whitney, too?
Of course.
See me just asking permission all the time. It's
Yeah.
so trained. Is because I had final thing. If you're a coach or like an advice giver or business owner, always check in with your partner or your friends that they want your advice before you give it.
Yeah.
Just
especially saying. If under human design you're a projector, and I'm speaking to my husband right now.
He's a projector. I'm a generator. Shocker.
Yeah. I couldn't tell, but yeah, him. I'm like, you need to ask for permission here. Nobody asks for your advice.
No, that reminds me. I'm like, anytime I bring something challenging to my boyfriend, I think he is a projector. And I never thought about like, what's his human design, but that's smart. Where was I going with this? Oh, 168 hours. So I read a book, changed my life. You don't need to read it because you probably don't have or want to make time for that. But we all have instead of being on this sort of daily grind, 365 days a year, shift out of that, this sort of scarcity mindset into more of an abundant mindset, like a 52-week rhythm. And how we do that is we have 168 hours in the week. So if you get 7 hours of sleep a night, that's like 49, 50 hours. If you work another 50 hours, that's 100. If you take care of your body, eat food, go on walks, work out, it's another 20 hours. So that's 120 minus 168. You have an extra 2 days in your whole week that you can spend your time however you want to, whether that's being intentional with your time as a business owner, or taking on a new hobby, learning a language. You have the time, you just have to design it. And it won't be perfect, but I think if you can outline what are your top 3 priorities in this season, how do you want to spend your extra time? You'll feel less drained you won't scroll social media because you'll be on purpose. And if you want to scroll social media, you'll give yourself like a time and energy budget to do it. So I think there's a way to just, especially as women, like getting into like a weekly rhythm, writing a weekly to-do list instead of a daily to-do list, or breaking it down like that has been such a game changer for me. And that's how I can manage so much in my own world.
Yeah, it really is so much mindset and how you think about the time that you have, and not making excuses for yourself anymore. I feel like, how do I make this work with the time that I have? How do I manipulate time? Because it really isn't totally real. So it is and it isn't,
Totally
so
with you. Well, it's like we created it. I also want to share that I want to go back to the question about, I think you asked like how, I sort of speak a middle language, and like if other people accept this too. Yeah, something like that. But I want to say that recently I submitted to speak at a conference. It's a women in technology conference with like the top women in cybersecurity, risk and privacy, all the things. And my topic for my talk is healing how women work. And it's very different than like the cloud security tracks, right? Or that people are getting. It's because it's under the leadership track. And so since I work for a large company for Accenture, I found out that I had to submit my very like vulnerable, hey, this is my life's work, really it's Wise Woman Co. stuff, through my day job and get them to approve it, have technical writers edit it. Girlfriend, I was like all on my feels about it. So I scheduled a call with them because I knew my talk was very different. I knew it was aligned to the leadership track. I given not this presentation before, but versions of it. But what was most interesting was they said, yes, it definitely stood out. And I boldly asked the question of, hey, I know this isn't what you're getting, but I knew like intuitively, I'm like, this is the message that I have to give anyway. Mm-hmm. So regardless of like, if they support this submission, which I found out yesterday they are, yay. Oh, awesome. Yay. Congrats. So I'll submit to speak at this conference. It's highly competitive. I think they get over 60 applications for literally like 4 to 8 spots. I was selected last year, but like this year it's like in person in Scottsdale / Sedona, because your girl just wants to go to Sedona for a day. Anyways, so I'm hopeful, but this is what I want to say to the listener. If you have a message and if you have a mission, find ways to share it. and find people who will open up doors for you, and find spaces like volunteer yourself, raise your hand. Like I lead more I think this year so far at Accenture, I've led 5 different, I call them mindfulness moments. These are all not paid, but they get me sort of brand exposure, leadership credibility within Accenture, which is huge and a very challenging place to network and feel a part of. And I've taught like a 3-minute meditation to like a 200 person audience almost every week. Like it's been a lot, but it's been really neat. So even if you are in a corporate space and want to find a way to do what you love there for free, it's a great place to get practice.
There's so much value in thinking of it that way, of like, even with this co-working space that I'm at right now, they're a client, but I also work here. And when I first started working here, my hourly is more than 4 times what they were going to pay me. And it was non-negotiable. And everybody was like, don't do it. And I was like, first of all, my intuition is telling me, yes, do it. And the benefits of working here and meeting all these people and using this place as a way to have conversations with people about what I want to do, which is be a community-driven person who is helping multiple businesses in the community. This was my conversation starter, and I could run my business out of it. Why would the hourly rate have anything to do with that? I would pay them to be here.
I think this also goes back to like as females asking for permission and being unapologetic. It's like I knew that when I wanted to host my first retreat in Ojai, California, that it just needed to be done. And I did that this past January, but I planned it at a time where I knew I was leaving my day job. I was closing $1 million in business for my current job in a cybersecurity sales role. And there was so much change happening, but I just knew it had to be done. And so I think that I remember my boyfriend even being like, why are you doing this? It's about to be the holidays. Now is not the time. But I knew in my heart it was the right thing to do. And I think that speaks to what you were saying, Whitney, of you have to trust your heart. And if you get like I think when you expand your emotional capacity by sitting with yourself in meditation or just deepening your own self-work, you'll get more intuitive pings and they'll be louder if you're open to listening. And so if we're following intuition, we really don't have to explain it. Like we just know that it needs to be done. And so even when you do get questioned, like in a worldly way of why, you know what I mean? Why are the people closest to you who you love the most will challenge you the most too. Because they love you and want you to support you. And it can create conflict because there's friction whenever you're changing and growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or there'll be the mirrors that are like, that doesn't make sense, or that it's a lot of cultural conditioning too, of like, this is the road you take. And this is what most people's path is.
Yeah. I think that's been something interesting too. Like in my career, I've been in sales roles. I've been in organizational strategy roles. I've been a yoga teacher. Like, do any of those really go together? Probably not. But I am the same who now works in change management. I'm the same person who's always been passionate about people. So I think if you're looking at creating your own story, look at the through lines. Like, how do you thrive? I thrive by bringing calm to chaos. It's a great tagline. Pretty sure you helped me with. But having that through line of like, I do that in the yoga studio, I do that at work, like that to me. So I think it just, for people listening, like get curious, like what is my purpose statement? And don't worry about it if it's for your whole life, like for this season, for the summer, for fall, like for this year, for the next 5 years. Just get curious and it'll evolve as you evolve.
And I think giving people the permission to do that too is really powerful, because so many of us, whether we're doing it consciously or not, aren't giving ourselves permission to evolve in ways. Like even me, I just got a branding judge and she came up with this new tagline for me that I was like, oh, this is kind of a through line. Like for everything that I do, she was like added for the dreamers. And I was like, I like that. Like that does work for me, because no matter who I'm serving, they are all people like I feed off of their dreams, whether that's for themselves, their business, both, whatever. And it's so simple, but it does encompass so much. Just like you saying, bringing calm to chaos, like that is your mission right now. And maybe you'll want a branding zhuzh on that, you know, in a couple of years when you're in a different season. But like, we get so stuck in these things of like, this is what I do and this is how, and that's all in scarcity too.
I think it's beautiful to look at it like an umbrella of like, if my mission is bringing calm to chaos, or my mission, like with Wise Women, is like healing how women work by giving them tactics and strategies. There are like so many ways that you can do that. And something that I do regularly, I call it taking like power pauses, but I have like a weekly sort of starting session of, hey, how do I want to direct my energy this week? And then at the end of the week, like, how do I want, like, reflection? Like, how did it go? What were my wins? What was awesome? What are my woes? What kind of sucked? What were my learnings? What are my wows? So wins, woes, and wows. Because to me, that keeps it real of not everything. You like, there will always be both little things and big things to make a difference, but those small actions along the way and those small moments where you're like, oh, can I place my hand over my heart? That's where my anxiety lives, and give myself compassion for feeling like, what is this anxiety here to teach me? What is the most natural next step? I think is so liberating.
Yeah. I've been pretty into tapping lately too.
Oh,
That's
go
been
girl.
really helpful for me.
Go girl.
Yeah.
I want to know who you tap with.
You kept mentioning Gabby Bernstein too, and I was like so late to that train, and now I've read like 3 of her books, and she, in her latest book that she just published, had talked about tapping.
Oh, Happy Days. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so many, it's kind of a thing now that people do. And one of our former podcast guests who is best friends with Emilie growing up, she specializes in it, and her name's Noemi Sparks. She actually lives in Redding, which is another hippie, awesome town in California. So she's a great person to like tap with, and she has these little circles that she just does on Sundays where you can just tap if you're feeling anxious, and it's like donation based. I've done it before with her, and it's really cool.
What I love about tapping is that it's scientifically backed. I love, like, especially, I think there's so many great spiritual teachers out there. There's plenty of spiritual teachers who don't know where they got the spirituality from, or they're not there. It's like cultural appropriation, right? Not honoring the lineage that it came from. So I would just encourage to anyone listening, like, get really clear on, what techniques you are practicing, how you're using them, and where do they come from? Because maybe that'll inform your own learning and your own wisdom in the future. I love that you're doing that. It's so great.
And it's so simple too, just like your red light, green light thing. Like you can do a 3-minute self-directed tap I've even,
because you're on meridian points, right?
Yep. Yeah. And even just like tapping against, like karate chopping the bottom of your hand, like when I've felt like if you're trying to hide it a little bit, like I've done that just sitting with my family before because I've been so stressed out.
Have you done this one? The peace begins with me. Inhaling.
No,
peace.
I've seen that. I've done it in yoga actually. She's putting her fingers together right now, each one on the thumb, one at a time. But that would be cool to bring to one of your yoga classes. I bet they'd love that. Because some of my favorite yoga studios around here, the teachers were very much like you, where they just, you're like, oh, you're bullshitting me. But others, I'm like, okay, she prepared this whole journey for us that we're about to go on. I want to really quickly ask you about being a LinkedIn influencer, because that is something and you don't have to own it, but to me, you are a LinkedIn influencer. And I'm like, dang, she's getting multiple thousands of reactions to her post. And where did that come from? Is that some sort of like magical thing? Or were you like, oh, I'm going to study this and kind of like learn the ways of the LinkedIn influencer?
Thank you for that. It makes me laugh. So because I, in my first job, was so unhappy, I was looking for ways to build my brand external to my company and started networking with all like the women in cybersecurity stuff. So I think that's how I started the following. It's interesting now being in a new role, like not that there's been less hype on my LinkedIn, but I'm not sharing as much because I'm sort of in this incubator mode. But one of my posts went viral and had, over 500,000 views, was international, got pushed to India, and like just kind of blew up globally, that I wasn't emotionally or energetically prepared for. Like, it's a big vulnerability of like, oh, I'm sharing about my new job and, speaking like a yoga teacher would on LinkedIn, but also being very corporate and like strategic and like tactical and, all that. So I think that I really want to lean in and honor my LinkedIn community, and it's really like a culmination of the amazing women and men that I've met along the way. So I would say, and I think a lot of people post LinkedIn trying to create like stories on Instagram or stories on Facebook. But if you want to like a hot tip, it's write something that's relevant to someone else, niche down on your field, and provide resources or links for something else. So that way you begin to share information that people can learn from. Yes, it becomes your professional highlight reel. But actually that inspires me to share, more with LinkedIn. I feel like this is personal, I know almost at time, but I've been hesitant to share on LinkedIn because of what I'm doing personally with Wise Woman. I'm not sharing like as much, but one day I see myself really being this like global spiritual business leader that can bridge that gap and has the infrastructure in my business to give people support. So right now I'm focused on like building my own skills and building up my own infrastructure to then one day have a membership, a community, something digestible for those struggling at work or struggling within their purpose, their Monday through Friday, to find sort of like their online yoga studio that's for like adult learning, career oriented, and coaching. That's the dream.
Well, you're embodying it now in my outward estimation. We have just a few quick questions. You already answered some of them for our rapid fires, but I'm going to ask them and you can reinforce them. You know how Oprah always is like, oh, retweet that, say that again. So I'm comparing you to Oprah right now. Like,
can I tell you a quick statement? She's my favorite. I wrote a book on her when I was in junior high. I was listening to a podcast. It was Super Soul yesterday with her and Byron Katie. And she talked about types of business. There's your business, there's other people's business, and then there's God's business. Delineate between the three. And I was like, oh, that helps me really get in my own mindset of like, if I'm receiving a projection from someone else, right? Questioning my decisions, like, oh, that's their business. How can I just focus on my own work versus being in judgment of others or maybe even of my past self? So, and then how can I leave the things that are up to God, like up to God and spirit and the universe to like do its thing in its own time?
I have on my to-do list, I have now, soon, and universe.
Okay, I love that.
Things that I'm giving up to the universe. Yeah. What are you proudest of in your business right now? And it could be in your job or in Wise Woman Co. or in yoga.
Yeah.
You kind of answered this already with the grandparents.
I'm proud that I am still connected to the what do I as an individual need to grow in while managing these things. Like my summer goals are to be kinder to myself and to my partner, to spend time in water, sweating, moving, floating in the river/ocean. And then my third, what is it? I forgot that third one, but anyways, like I know my own goals right now, and I think that that's really healthy. In my business with Wise Woman, because of what's looming in the world with the recession and just savings, I decided to, even though I haven't announced this fully, like pull the retreat back and postpone it. I'm proud that I made that decision because it's smarter for me financially and it's smarter for me to think about how can I serve women in a more accessible way in the time that they need it most, where they also need to be mindful about their money moves. That's big. And then personally, I think getting back to like loving my body and loving my yoga practice, like for it being what it is, not as something that I'm performing or planning, but really as something that I'm moving emotions, that I'm connecting to my own breath and body and being present. And then at work, I really think I'm doing a great job, like crushing and keeping balls in the air and keeping my, for lack of better terms, like my shit straight and my mind cool and calm, like whenever it hits the fan. So I'm proud of that
Yep,
too.
as you should be. Tell us about a book you read or a podcast you listened to recently that changed the way you're thinking about your life or your business. And you've mentioned a few, but I'm sure you have more.
My Body by Emilie R. His last name I can't pronounce. Rakowski.
Emily Radikowski, I just finished that a few months ago. Amazing.
Absolutely amazing. It helped me as someone who's, navigating body image post injury and pandemic. Like, I think it just taught me so much of how much I changed my body for the shape of others or for the perception of others. And now I just get to embody like the power and the wisdom and the goodness that is me.
And talk about somebody who really like stood in her power and was like, you all don't get to tell me who and what I am and what I'm good at and box me into just being a pretty face with big boobs. Like,
Yeah.
I am so much more than that. And so many of these celebrity types, they ghost write their books, which is fine, but she did not. And it was really incredibly written. And I'm glad you mentioned it because I actually was just talking about it earlier this week, telling people to read it.
Yeah, and early in my career, I was told from someone like in IT, like that I was just a skirt, that I wasn't like smart, didn't know about technology, that I was just female, and that made me powerful. And so and also my very first, I know this is closing and both like deeply powerful, but my first manager told me I needed to temper my energy and my personality in order to fit in with the male dominated industry. So at the age of 22, I pivoted to like smiling at work, to wearing all black, to carrying a small bag, to then like having yoga come in my world and be like, no, I am feminine and I'm going to express that. And that fierce masculine business driver, sorority woman leader in me is going to shine. But I think that really took me to get to my 30s to really embody and embrace being in my own skin and doing things my own way and not being apologetic for it.
Yeah. And that's what I love about the difference between our stories because I was just like, oh, you all keep telling me like who and what to be. I'm just going to not participate in this anymore and create my own space. Whereas you're like, no, I'm going to make change within that.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody kind of has their own role. But I kind of got to a place, especially with kids, where I was like, I'm not commuting to this to be told that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I just want to say I really respect that for you, that you are pushing through.
What I want to share is I think we need to honor how we work, whether that is not in corporate. I think there's a big spirituality push of like, you can't be spiritual and in corporate. I'll argue with that. Like, I think, for some people who like it, like there's this space and I think there's a community to serve who really needs support and clarity and like vulnerability in that environment. So what I want to say is I don't think yes, it can be an all or nothing for people. I think that's okay. Yes, some people can be all in too, but I think there's a happy medium. And that's what I'm trying to play in of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It's like the yoga teacher.
And I love that for us. Yeah.
Like talking about tools like on and off the mat, same thing. Like I'm a more powerful leader and coach because I still balance this world while being able to lean into spirituality where I can too.
And who knows how many people you're saving in a way or letting them know it's okay to be me here versus my experience where it's like, oh, it's not okay to be me. So I'm just going to go be me and try to make money on my own terms. But if I had had more people like you to see or supporting me, then maybe it would have been different.
Yeah.
You never know.
It's been beautiful to see some of the women that I mentor become guides of others or like community builders too. But I also think for the people in corporate who don't believe, like my sweet 23-year-old cousin calls me last night. I had her when she was looking for jobs, write a letter to her future self with the exact dollar amount of how much she wanted to receive. She called me and said, Jess, I am not a woo believer at all, but you texted me like, hey, congrats on being in your role for 6 months. So proud of you, blah, blah, blah. And then she got her final job offer, like the full-time offer, since she was doing contract work. She got an extra $15K than she expected. So she got $65,000 a year instead of the $50 that she wanted. And she's like, I don't know what you did, but I'm a woo believer now. And that letter I thought was really dumb, but now I'm like into spirituality because I think that, as a 23-year-old, like we're not taught to work in a way that's feminine. We're sustainable. So
I love that.
Yeah.
And I hope she wrote this or something better.
I love that. Love. Yep.
And it's cool too that she has you in her corner teaching her then, because when I was 23, I wasn't thinking like that either. I was just so grateful to have any job.
Yeah. And my family, I grew up in an oil and gas town, which not many people know. And my dad was a blue collar and my mom is a teacher and a principal. Amazing. And I didn't have the skills or really the family who navigated the cybersecurity industry or the tech world or the corporate world, like show me how to do things. So I had to figure out early on, but it was because I used those skills of my values of like grit and getting things done, sort of that blue collar hustle to crack open doors where they were peaked. And I'm also a fan of that spirituality, like rejection is redirection. I think more women need to get comfortable getting rejected in order to take risk and trust in divine timing. I think that that's a huge thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. What would your last meal be?
I would say, like, where would my last meal be? It would be on the Amalfi Coast, but I would be eating like a seafood pasta with a bright salad and walking up a bunch of stairs wearing a really fabulous dress. And yeah, romantic candlelit music, all the things. That would be my ambiance.
The vibe. What's the best business purchase you've made in the last 6 months under $100?
Oh, I love that it's under $100.
Right? People cannot figure it out to save their lives. I'm like, oh, I'd have so many things to say.
I really love Wild House Paper Co. They have a musings notepad that I think is $24. I'm on my third one. That's just like, I'm a big journal person, even though I have an iPad and like use GoodNotes digitally, it doesn't do the same thing as like touching and feeling paper and having that process. So I would say my notebook from Wild House Paper Co. and also the self-reflection checklist, they sort of have this beautiful past, present, future, how'd you nourish yourself throughout your day check-in that I also bought.
So cool.
Yeah, it's great. Love them.
I am such an analog person. I love a notebook, and I'll make sure to link that in the show notes and probably go buy one.
It was so good to connect with you, and thank you so much for having me. I'm so inspired and present and just grateful to know badass women like you making such a difference in the world as a community builder.
I'm so glad you're here. I have one last question for you. What's lighting you up lately?
I keep doing those faces, by the way. Sorry. Lighting me up.
I love it.
I'm just such an animated individual, so Italian. I feel like I'm very, cliche me wants to say sunsets, but I don't think that's it. I think it's the moment in coming out of yoga in Shavasana. And especially for the pregnant moms, when I have them like put their hand on their heart and their baby and like do sort of Reiki energetics, that's what's lighting me up the most. Having those sort of like holy moments, sunshine coming through, etc.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. How can everybody find you, and where do you want them to find you? Because you're a lot of places.
Hey, find me on Instagram at wisewomanco. You can also go to the website, www.wisewomanco.org. It is trademarked. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, Jessica Valentine Patterson. I'll have more of a community being built out there in the near future to boost my LinkedIn influencer vibes, but mainly just create this badass space for spiritual business women to bond and connect and get resources they need to be successful and spiritual.
Yes, and we need you, especially in your space. They need you a lot. I'm sure you will work with a lot of developer men, and they're like, what?
It's interesting. I've worked with more right now. This is what I'm most grateful for. Senior female leaders who are so wicked smart and intelligent, and bosses. I think the biggest challenge and opportunity that I have and any company has is how can you simplify what you do and actually make it digestible to people in a way that makes sense for them. So I'm right now as a new hire, like learning the language, learning how to simplify and learning what boundaries. It's just like being a toddler, right? You have small children, like I'm pushing boundaries, like what can I change and implement and what's sort of a no-go zone and who do I need to be friends with kind of thing in order to create a fun playground here.
That's inspiring. And to the kid point too, it's cool for kids to be able to see what's possible for them in so many different ways, whether they are like, I never knew what cybersecurity is. Like now they have reference points of people who can simplify it for them and really show them the worlds available to them. So thank you for all you're doing in all of your worlds and for being here. And to our audience, thank you for listening to this latest episode of The Coast. We will see you next time.
Bye, y'all.
This episode's music was provided by Sloan Best.
And editing provided by Kayla Shu.